weekly update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim, and today we will talk about the role of university museums with guests. David Brenneman, director at the Eskenazi, sorry about that, David, Museum of Art at Indiana University. Amy Gilman, director of the Chazen Museum of Art at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And David Little, director and chief curator at the Mead Art Museum at Amherst College. A reminder to Zoom attendees that we will take 3 snap polls during the show, and we'll announce results, and questions submitted to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen will be included in our discussion. So thank you all for joining us. I've really been looking forward to discussing the role of university museums. We've known each other for a really long time. You've helped us in the course of our search work. We've talked, David, you've given me tours at some of the institutions that you've worked at. David Little, you and I did a program a while ago through one of the PBS associations that we had. Amy, you've helped us as well. Let's talk about the role of university museums, starting off with you, David, because this idea of a university art museum is both consistent with the whole museum ecosystem, but it's also distinctive in its own way. What's your take on the world of university art museums as a particular part of this enormously interesting arts ecosystem?
So, Mark, are you asking me or
yes,
David?
You, David Brenneman.
So I began my museum career in academic art museums, and then I moved into a 20-year career in a standalone city art museum, the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, Georgia, and that was a fantastic experience. I'd say the differences between a standalone city art museum and a university art museum is that within the university, we're considered a nested institution. So the institution that I work for is Indiana University, and I direct the art museum, which is an important part, but a small part of a much larger organization. And I think university art museums have a special charge, which is to use their resources for students, for the university community. But I would say that some of the similarities, or maybe some of the growing similarities, is that whereas university art museums might have been in the past able to be sort of inwardly turned research institutes, we are having to become much more outwardly facing, both within our university communities and then the surrounding communities. And I would say that that for me, one of the wonderful things about being in a university is that there are ideas everywhere. There are talented people right next door. I told people when I moved from Atlanta to Bloomington that my physical world got very small, but my intellectual world got huge. And I would say for me, that's one of the really amazing things about being here, being at a place like Indiana University.
Well, the wonderful thing about this image, this idea of a gateway, right? You get this sense, and I hate to draw a really funny conclusion or analogy, but you get this sense of, a place, but with windows and doors and walls blasted through and people sort of climbing in and disrupting and questioning and so on. Amy, I saw you smiling and nodding, and do you find that analogy of sort of this gateway into the community, but also being able to exploit that rich intellectual work and diverse intellectual work of students and faculty and so on? Is that part of how you think of your museum?
I was really chuckling because as David Brenneman actually knows, like I use this analogy to describe the Chazen all the time, in part because we have 2 buildings that are connected by a bridge that actually is sort of over and like sort of hugs a pedestrian mall that is the gateway, is one of the main gateways to campus, right? So literally we are at the edge of, we face both campus and community. And in our case, and I think this is true for our colleagues here, like there is no large civic encyclopedic art museum in Madison. So we actually also serve that function too. And there are other museums and even another art museum, but it's a contemporary focus. So when I got here, and like David Brenneman, I had spent a lot of time in Toledo at a big civic. I actually came in with no expectations about what a university art museum was supposed to do, because I had not actually come from that background previously. And that has been very freeing for me. I could just basically put quotes around David's statement about the intellectual sort of like fermenting that goes on at a huge research university. It's remarkable. I've never been in an environment quite like this, where you need an expert. Somebody here is doing groundbreaking work on that, right? Whether in the arts or sciences or elsewhere. And that's incredibly exciting. And I think that even not thinking about COVID at the moment is like one of the most interesting challenges to me, is like reimagining what this university art museum could be in the 21st century, and really embracing the concept of being relevant to teaching and learning at a major research university.
And that sort of comparison of your previous experience in Toledo, a fantastic museum with a fantastic collection. I mean, just really amazing.
Right.
But the context of an independent museum really it refers to its collection, particularly one as rich as the Toledo Museum of Art. And David, when you're looking at what you're doing at the Mead, you're not only referring to your collection, it's the same thing that Amy was talking about. You're not only referring to your collection, but you're thinking in very virtual terms, because you have a faculty, you have students, not to suggest that university students and faculty might be opinionated.
No.
That's the best part, though, is you get you get a different kind of dynamism, a sort of sustained dynamism at a college, because you have an audience. Now, granted, at a civic museum, you have those regulars, but you really have an intense relationship with students over a 4-year period, and of course with your faculty for as long as you're working with the museum. But just to get back to the other points that were made, I think the other important thing just to underscore is the idea of depth. I was, one of my first jobs was as director of academic programs at MoMA, and we worked with lots of great academic institutions, and we would collaborate, but the kind of sustained depth and research that you get at a university and college museum is very different. And the involvement that you get both from faculty and it's so important to underscore too, the role of students, that students themselves, I mean, these incredibly bright young people who are bringing great ideas to the museum and to the university and colleges. We really utilize them and learn from them through this process. And just the way we were talking a little bit about collection, the way that you think about your collections are very, very different. For instance, at the Mead, we're a rather, small space in terms of like roughly around 4,000 square feet. So if I look at my walls, I can show maybe 250 to 300 works, but about 1,800 or 2,000 works are studied every year. So most of our collection is actually used not in the galleries, but in the study spaces. And then the other thing I would say, both at the university level and college, is the idea of collaboration. At the Mead, I have a very close relationship with our Russian Center. We have one of the best Russian collections because of an alum. So we're working together collaboratively on an intellectual level, but also with the art. And then with the 5 colleges as well, and the collaborations that happen there. And again, those happen in other civic museums, but there's a kind of close-knit community that is a little bit more intense, I find, with these college relationships.
You're making a wonderful point, because when we look at the dialogue that is progressing within society, there is sometimes a separation between the dialogue in society and museums, where controversy isn't necessarily something that you want to embrace because it might suppress visitation. Whereas controversy is the lifeblood of an academic institution. You have academics who disagree. You have students who disagree. You have new ideas filtering in. Are you finding, Amy, that your collection and your museum spaces are also used in an academic study way by artists? We also have studio artists, right, who are coming in to study works. Are you finding that like David Little, that you have this non-exhibition set of programmings and not non-education in terms of art historical set of activities, but real grappling with works that are happening by students who are studying in a way that doesn't necessarily happen at an independent museum?
Sure. I think that, so when I got here, our engagement with the faculty and teaching and learning was I think fairly typical of many university art museums. And as David was describing, like great relationships with individual faculty, a lot of bespoke learning, right? Like they reach out and they say, we'd love to be able to do a print study room, a visit around, Slavic history at this point and look at prints, right? I mean, like whatever you're talking about. Now, I will tell you about a little experiment we've done this summer that was kind of in the works prior to COVID, but then it really accelerated this summer, which was that we made the decision that in about May that we were going to just like double down on creating a set of curriculum in modules that faculty could access that is about the collection. And it's thematic based. It's not about art history. It's actually tied to what we have on UW campus. I think this is common at many large universities, a big read, right? Like a collective reading every year. It's called the Go Big Read at UW. And in our case this year, it's called Parkland. So it's about the Parkland movement and the movement about of the survivors of the shooting at Parkland High School. And that doesn't have like a clear relationship to the museum's collection, but we chose themes around art and activism and trauma and resilience, which also feel very, very present today, right? Not just related to Parkland. And then we've done this like little curriculum modules that faculty can pull into their courses, irrespective, and adapt them and change them and do whatever. And it's related to our collection, right? We've like identified core groups of works. And in that way, we're trying this experiment where we know that more faculty will use it. They are dying for really good online content, right? That will be engaging. But we also think this is going to have a much longer tail post-COVID, right? Where we can like start producing curriculum that faculty can access in different ways, in addition to the kind of bespoke things that we have done on a really regular basis and will obviously continue.
And David,
Mark, I think Amy makes a really great point in that model. And I think we often think about the faculty bringing ideas to the museum, but the museum can bring ideas to the faculty and in the community and the curriculum. And you see that through special knowledge that members of one staff has. And so that dynamic, I think, is really, really important in terms of enriching the curriculum and enriching colleges and universities.
One of the hopeful signs is that in response to the poll, and incidentally, please attendees, you can ask questions on the Q&A function and we'll try and deal with them in real time. But we just had a poll completed in which 45% of respondents said that they had visited museums during the pandemic.
Yay!
Yeah, I mean, when you look at, for example, the performing arts, that number is way, way down. And museums, because of their dynamic, you can socially distance. You can do it more safely and carefully. You have a semi-controlled environment. David Brenneman, are you finding that your museum is receiving visitation and that it's enlivened by interactions with audiences and students and so on, or are you more or less shut down?
Well, I would say that one of the words that came into common usage, and that's going to be, I think, a standard word is the word hybrid. And that means at Indiana University and probably other colleges and universities, it means a blend of in-person teaching and online or virtual learning. And so we were able to pivot pretty quickly to that new model or that new structure. And so I would say, our museum is opened. We opened at the end of August, just around the time that students came back to Bloomington. And we'd had to put in COVID restrictions in terms of numbers of people who could be in the building. Everybody had to be masked, so we had to put security in certain places so that they could check people and talk with them when they came into the building. We have maximum numbers of people in our galleries. So I would say people are coming back to the museum. And I think that it's really the things that I've heard is that there are new students who are exploring the museum, and then members of our community are also just see it as a really wonderful amenity. And so yes, people are coming to our museum, they're enjoying, but we've also really taken the opportunity, I suppose, of the pandemic to invest a lot more time and energy and thinking in our virtual engagement work. And so that's been something that we've been, again, that we see as part of the future, not only of our museum, but I think museums in general.
I just love that point that you made about being a hybrid institution. Could you all talk, David, maybe we start with you. How do you feel about this idea of hybrid institutions where we're no longer pure one thing or the other, but we're exploring models that might break some rules from the past?
Yeah, I think all of us are experiencing that. I mean, the funny thing, Mark, is that we've always been hybrid institutions, but maybe haven't given the attention to our websites and to our digital programs that we're being asked to do now. And I agree that will always be part of what we need to do is to create. I mean, many of us have a much higher attendance coming to our website than ever come to our museum. I still think, though, that at the end, even within this hybrid model, that there'll be this incredible lure to come and experience the work firsthand. And I had my preparator who had a great point about some of the hybrid classes. I asked him, I said, how is everything going at the hybrid classes and how are the students doing? He said, the remote students have this sense of community because they see the other students in the museum. So it's a really interesting connection between the outside and the inside. And I would have never thought of something like that, such a wonderful observation that they could imagine themselves in the museum and experiencing the work firsthand. But the hybrid is certainly, and I'm so excited. We're really at the horse and buggy stage, I think, of utilizing the digital. I mean, I think we've all done these wonderful virtual tours, but we've got a lot to work, and it's just a matter of a lot of work to do. It's a matter of also creating content that can have a long life, as Amy had mentioned. And really, I really think the next level for the digital now is we really need to think about digital curators in the future and really start to invest in that.
I couldn't agree more. In our work, one of the things that we've been trying to get across is within this idea of hybrid programming is actually the solution to issues like the racial disparities that exist within museums, right? We just recruited Patrick Sims, actually, from the University of Wisconsin to be the provost over.
Patrick, I love Patrick.
Isn't he great?
Oh, I was so sorry to see him go, man. I mean, great hire. Well done. Yeah,
well, the interesting thing here is that Patrick's sensibility is very hybridized. There's nothing pure, right? And the reason why that's important is that if you look at purity results in the constant repetition of past definitions. And so you have embedded within that approach some real confirmation bias. Amy, when you're looking at your work and interacting with the community, how are you driving change? how are you adapting to the dialogue that is unfolding across America in a way that allows these views, whether it's views on race, views on the economy, views on our international place in the world, our values? How do you bring that into your environment so that you're not suppressing a viewpoint, but you're allowing for exploration of diverse audiences and diverse sensibilities within your space?
So, I mean, I'll just say, I want to talk about just briefly about like why being part of a big research institution is like been very appealing to me, and because of something that you're talking about, which is that we can explore things. And in fact, I think it is incumbent on university art museums to do research. And usually, historically, that has actually been about researching objects in the collection and doing whatever. But what I'm talking about is actually doing research about what it means to be a museum, right? Because as you point out, we have some flexibility that maybe other models do not have in this way. So, pre-pandemic, the most press that we received since I had gotten to the museum in fall 2017 was in the fall of 2019, when we like radically opened the museum 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, because we decided that we actually don't know when people really want to come to museums. We think we know because some museum gods came down in the 40s and said you shouldn't be open on Mondays and you should close at 5 o'clock and like whatever, right? And at a big civic museum, it's really hard to change that dynamic because every hour is very expensive, right, to do. So one of the things that we were thinking about, and now post COVID, I'm like, oh yeah, doubling down on like being the most open art museum in the country sounds maybe not like the best decision, but underneath it was this concept that we should pilot something and then study it and get feedback about it and learn from it and then push it into the field, right? So that other museums can pick up on what we've learned. And maybe that becomes something that, a big civic could then take to a donor and say, what we've learned is that people really do, like, it would be better for us to be open from 12 to 8 every day, even if you're still closed on Mondays, because people really do want to come after work, right? And not just on Thursdays or Fridays. And I think that, getting back to what you were just really asking about is like, it is actually incumbent on us to set up situations where we can experiment with things that are challenging and things that are difficult and all of that, because actually we are nested within institutions that are grounded in on that mission.
We just completed another poll and we asked what university art museums do better than independent art museums. And the answer that received the most votes, almost 70%, is that university art museums are better at combining disparate elements with visual arts, mathematics, other art forms, lectures, plays, and so on and so forth. And then we also got that university art museums are better at staging exhibitions on controversial issues like racism, climate change, policing, and so on. And then that was about 58%. And the third answer that garnered a lot of support is that university art museums are better at innovating in ways that challenge conventional thinking, which goes to points that all three of you made. And I got a question from Ricardo Reyes at the University of Hartford about how you engage various disciplines across campus. David Brenneman, do you want to take that in terms of how you take people who don't necessarily come into the museum every day?
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
Well, I think it's a challenge. I mean, I think that again, as I mentioned earlier, the way that university art museums were managed, the expectations that they set of themselves and that were set upon them was really to be kind of quiet, kind of inwardly turned research institutions, and that's changing, and it's changing by necessity, and it's changing by desire. And but I don't think that the university, at least this is true of Indiana University, is really structured in a way that naturally fosters exchange and dialogue and information sharing. It's something that you really have to invest some significant time and energy to make happen. And I do think the opportunity for art museums on university campuses is that I guess I call it a leadership opportunity. And it's a leadership opportunity that art museums are, I think, particularly well equipped to take on. And so I think we have to think about strengthening and discovering new partnerships, strengthening old partnerships, discovering new partnerships on campus, and really taking the time and energy and investing in those partnerships, which I don't think they'll be successful if they're one-offs. They need to be ongoing, and our colleagues across the university need to feel that it's a true partnership. So we're in the process of doing some strategic planning, and partnerships, particularly on campus, are an area where we're going to be investing a lot more time and energy.
Yeah, I would say, just as a follow-up on David's remarks, is I think those relationships and partnerships are so critical, and figuring out ways to recruit young faculty, we find in particular, and we host events in the fall and the spring to sort of help introduce them to how to teach with the museum. The same thing with young students as well. But Mark, I want to return really quickly to your comments about the political in the museum, and then also Amy's comment about the museum as a model, the academic museum. And I think that's where we can really separate ourselves, is to model activities. I mean, I haven't had a single person, I've been at the Mead for 5 years, I haven't had a single person call me and ask me what the attendance is at the Mead. It's not, I'm not watching the attendance, we're free. Until Amy stole our fire, we used to be open the most hours a year, where we are open during non-COVID 9 to 12 at night. But Amy, you beat us. So, but we're going to.
Oh, I like the 9 to 12 at night. That's good.
We're going to catch up to you. But what I wanted to get to is that the political I found was, it's not to say it was easy, but it's easier. We've collected about 70% artists of color in the last 5 years and done political shows. But we're really at a new stage right now as a result of the George Floyd. And that's where I think that museums can model themselves. And that's about the process. It's about the structural racism within our institutions, both the institutions that we're part of and our own museums, and how we can look at kind of the structural processes of how we do things. That includes recruiting. We are at the Mead working on, we're rewriting our job descriptions, looking at even the way that we signal the types of programs that we're going to do, our teaching goals, our mission statement. I'm rewriting with the board. But, when you start to really look at this work, and it's hard, and also our own self-learning, it's a really hard process. But I really think that is the most political thing that we can do as college and academic museums, and really model behaviors and goals for larger civic museums, because we do have a kind of support system that there really is no excuse for us not to be doing this.
Some of your points feed into a question that was posed by Stephen Miller about collecting policies and accessioning, deaccessioning. I think what you're saying in that part of your point, David, is that our collections were previously, they dealt in a wedge here of the entire world of art. And a lot of that was informed by the founding of these institutions, which were formed by white Europeans. And then now, it isn't that wedge is bad. It's that wedge is completely insufficient. And we didn't know it, right? We in America, the people who were in power were focused on their lives, right? Now we have to expand. We have to expand until we have the full circle of America. And for the first time in this nation's history, we have to think in ways that go beyond our own sensibility. Amy, when you're looking at how you're shaping the collections, that's a complicated thing, right? You can't collect infinitely. You have to deaccession. You have to touch that third rail. You have to make intelligent decisions. How are you approaching it? How in a university environment do you actually get to a point of action and not just debate and hand-wringing? How do you get to the point where you can actually change your collection in ways that take into account some of the points that David was making?
Sure, I think that David's comment is so perfect about like he when David is talking about what percentage of people of color, artists of color, has been acquired by the museum. Like, that is a choice. That is a choice. That is not just something that like happened in the world, right? That is a choice that David has made as a leader, as part of this time. And that is where I really feel like we come down to as leaders within our institutions, within the field, is really making very deliberate choices about what is a priority for us. And I think it's this false discussion that people get into about, like, you're going to sacrifice this discussion about quality and whatever, but diversity is excellence, right? And we actually will not have an excellent collection until we are more and more comprehensively diverse, right?
Right.
I mean, studies have shown this about diverse workplaces, about all of this stuff, and I believe that about the collection. And that means that you are making choices about what it is that you're doing with your limited funds to be able to do that. And around deaccessioning, I mean, I think that we really, deaccessioning is a part of the like managing a collection appropriately.
Right.
But you really do, it is not something to be done quickly, and it is not something to be done in order to satisfy the need of a moment, right? That is why those original rules, right, have been there for so long about like that you deaccession, and in order to be able to feed the collection, is that it should not take a short amount of time to deaccession something, right? It should be a process. There should be things that you're ticking off. There should be experts that you're talking to, all of those things. And you should be able to point to that as part of the process. And I do believe that is an important part of shaping the collection. But it is not a short-term process to undergo.
David, I'm going to give you the last word. David Brenneman, I'm going to give you the last word because we're coming to the end of our time, and I see you're about jumping out of your skin. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to kind of follow on to the things that both Amy and David have said. I mean, one of the things that's amazing about IU is the incredible amount of material culture here. And I think there was a census recently. There's over 250 collections at IU. And there's probably in the range of millions of objects at Indiana University. And it's a kind of a Wunderkammer of you name it, we got it. And a question, though, I would say in this virtual age, this digital age, is what is the point of having things? What is the point of having material objects? It's a very basic question, but no one has really asked it in a comprehensive, in a deep, in an idea-driven way. And I think, before you begin talking about deaccessioning, which I've done and been involved in my career, I think you have to talk about what is it that you want, and what is it that your collections, that your material collections mean to you and your institution and its research mission. And I think, again, those are kinds of questions that when I arrived at IU, I would have thought, well, people thought about that and there are answers to that. And there aren't, because no one's thought about it, because frankly, in some ways, it's so huge, and then also, kind of touching on what Amy was just saying, our collections are incredibly diverse to the extent that we have works of art from just about every art producing culture in the history of mankind. But no one knows that. And I see the real challenge for us is connecting those works of art with people, with human beings, with folks that could connect with those things and find meaning in those things. But we haven't really been very good at making those and finding those connections.
I think that's such an important point. What you're saying, what you're all saying, is that if we're going to solve the problem of museums being too much of a monoculture, being too European art oriented, and having curators and staff and so on who come from largely, not exclusively, but largely from that tradition, we have to think differently about art and culture. We have to think differently about intersectionality, because in cultures that are non-European, you have this different sensibility, and people are interested. They have educated themselves. They have developed this idea of what art is that has been traditionally left outside of these institutions. Now we have to throw open the doors. It's David Little, your idea of this gateway. Amy, the idea of a gateway. David Brenneman, this idea of a gateway. We're throwing open the doors. We're welcoming those new ideas, and with that, new curators, right?
Right. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's so great to talk with friends where we've had these conversations and bring them out into the open. I do apologize, attendees. We have quite a few questions that we're not able to deal with in our short time. David Little of the Mead, Amy Gilman of Chazen, and David Brenneman of Eskenazi. Thank you so much for sharing your work. That's the Nonprofit Report. Attendees, thank you for your questions. Everybody stay safe, everybody mask up, and we'll see you next Tuesday.